Hey everyone, before we begin the episode, I just wanted to put in a little note that I decided after editing this interview that I just couldn't fit it all into one episode. So I decided to split it into two. So today you will be listening to part one. All right, enjoy. Welcome to Misunderstood, where we talk about identity, the meaning of the word race, and explore the multicultural and multiracial experience through personal stories, candid conversations, and expert insights. I'm Hana Lee. Thank you for being here. Today, we continue the conversation around transracial and transcultural adoption, and I feel so privileged to have Maria Fernanda join us. Born in Quito, Ecuador, Maria Fernanda's life took a pivotal turn when she was surrendered to an orphanage before her first birthday. Adopted and brought to the United States at a young age, Maria grappled with the complexities of transracial adoption, longing to understand her roots and reclaim her identity. Her journey of self-discovery led her to co-create Adoptees of Latin America plus Extended Latin Americas, a community space for adult adoptees with ties to Latin countries, as well as Guia, a mentoring program for adoptees in all stages of the reunion process. Join us as we delve into Maria Fernanda's incredible journey of finding her birth family, as well as discuss the themes of loss, reunion, and mental health impacts within the adoptee community, and the importance of keeping adoptees at the center of the conversation.
I often led with the narrative of what my adoptive parents, my U.S. parents, told me. And rarely did I ever lead with how I felt or with the acknowledgement of my first family, birth family. I knew that I was of mixed race, Ecuadorian and Black, but I didn't know which parent was what. And that's pretty much it. I wouldn't learn her name until 2014, until I was 30.
Before we start, it's important to say that Misunderstood is a space where stories, ideas, and research are shared for your consideration, but it's up to you to shape your opinions in light of your own knowledge and experience. My hope is to explore, learn, and grow together with you. I don't claim to have all the answers. My aim is to start conversations around these topics. Welcome, Maria Fernanda.
Thank you so much. I'm really grateful to be here.
Thank you so much for doing this. I know that you are in the middle of major transition in your life and you made time for this. So you just sold your home.
Yes.
And you need to be out in like a week, you said?
Yep.
So you're in like packing mode.
Cleaning mode, yeah, all of that stuff.
Deciding what you're keeping, what you're letting go of.
Yeah, we've done a lot of that in the beginning, like when we decided to put it on the market. So now it's just doing it one more time and then cleaning up, then making the big move.
Oh my gosh, I'm stressed just thinking about it. Like I am so bad at these kinds of things. And if I was in your shoes, I don't know if I would have it in me to do a podcast interview. So thank you.
Of course. No problem.
And then in the midst of all of this, your firstborn is also going out into the world and leaving the nest.
She is. Yeah, it's a big transition on top of another transition, and I'm just really grateful that I can be a part of it and just make sure she's, sent off with guidance and support and resources.
When is she leaving?
Around the same time that we are.
Oh my gosh. And is she moving to another state or?
No, she'll be local, but out of the family nest.
Okay. Within reach still.
Yes.
Okay. She could still come home for dinner.
Yes.
Kind of thing.
For sure.
Wow. I was curious. I know you were born the same year I was. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it. Am I?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. It was a little bit ago. It was the year of 84. What month were you born?
Supposedly January.
Oh, supposedly.
Yes.
So you don't know. That wasn't in your records.
Well, the thing is with like the history of adoption, and the documents and the legal work that goes into it and just the system. sometimes that information isn't either shared or it's changed or it's completely erased. I haven't had any documents that say it where I'm like content, birth certificate, and all of that stuff. So from all of my life that I've been alive, I've acknowledged it or celebrated it in the month of January. And, I did have confirmation from birth family, but I'd like to go and like see it on paper if possible, if that's something that could happen for me.
So that's on the horizon for you?
Yes, definitely, for sure.
Wow. We just opened a whole can of worms here.
Yes.
How was that growing up and you didn't know your actual birth date? Was that a thing, or did you just pick a day and you were like, it's going to be this? Or what did you do when you were growing up and other kids had a birth date? Yeah. How did you handle that?
That's a great question, and it's going to be different for every adoptee, But from my personal experience, it was the day that I had always known. It was the day that it was acknowledged. It's the day that I still acknowledge it. And I don't have a birth certificate, right? Like I have the naturalization, but I don't have a birth certificate, which for me, as I've gotten older now, when I was younger, I celebrated my birthday. And it wasn't until about 2014 or before that, where I was kind of diving into, well, I don't really know those concrete facts that people who are not adopted know. The time that they were born, how big they were, and all of those things. So when I started to unpack my story and unpack the history and the narrative that I was told, I began to question, like, is this even my birthday? And it kind of was an interesting experience that started to happen was when the birthday was approaching. I was just kind of curious, and I'm like, am I even celebrating it on the day? And eventually I had to just give myself permission to navigate it in a way that felt best for me, right? And some people don't acknowledge it. Some people don't want to acknowledge it, especially if they don't know, or some people don't want to acknowledge it because in our history, there's severed disconnections and loss. And so it just varies from person to person. But for me, it wasn't until later in life where I began to kind of be curious about this day that everybody acknowledged. And it's kind of what got me curious and just, wanting to ask questions and wanting to find answers.
So up until the age of about 14, you had like quote unquote regular birth date.
I would say probably later than that, actually, probably in my 30s.
Oh.
Yeah.
So up until the age of 30, you were like, everything's fine. This is my birthday.
Yeah.
And then once you started delving into your history and doing all this investigation, you suddenly realized, actually, that's not a given anymore.
Right.
And I'm shifting how I'm choosing to celebrate my birthday and not assuming that this is a fact.
Right.
So what did you do? Did you just have birthday month?
Well, it differs, and I know we'll dive into it, just from the experiences that I've had, like in 2020, and how that also shaped how I navigated my birthday and just celebrations in general that the world kind of acknowledges in, their kind of way, or what's been constructed for us to acknowledge a certain way. But I sometimes found myself mourning a little bit about not knowing. So there were times where birthdays didn't feel that great as they did when I thought that it was my birthday. I didn't question it. And then when the idea of, well, I don't really know, it just, have I been celebrating my birthday on, the wrong time of day, the wrong month? And it just kind of shifted in how I acknowledged it. And over the years, I began to acknowledge it in a way where I was celebrating myself and not necessarily like my birth, because, I could even break that down a little bit more. I don't know the details yet on even my birthday, like how that even transpired. So I don't know if there were complications. I don't know, and we can celebrate life and we can acknowledge that I'm alive and all of that. But for me, it's also acknowledging where I am today, and just acknowledging myself as a human and all of that. So it really began to just acknowledge me. And if I want to focus on that birthday, it's connecting with people who understand the challenges, doing things that I really enjoy that make me feel good, or, relaxing and chilling, it being low key, and it doesn't have to be this big celebration. And I've learned over time how to navigate it. The last few years, pre-pandemic, it was starting to just feel very interesting, and I didn't know, and trying to explain that to people who don't know what it feels like to be in my shoes, it made it challenging to even kind of talk about it. So over course of the few years that I have been talking about it, I'm like, okay, I can celebrate it however I want, and I can celebrate traditions however I want. I don't have to do it how it's always been. It can evolve, and it can be where I center myself, or I celebrate it with people, or I don't celebrate it with people. So it really is about checking in on how I'm feeling and what I want to do. And, I give myself permission to show up for myself and ask for help and support if I need it.
Wow, I'm so glad you're sharing this with me and with us because I feel, first of all, so ignorant that I even started with that because it's just shows how much I take for granted this thing called birthday and how much I assume that it's just like this basic thing that everybody does. And now as you were speaking, I was like, oh my goodness, of course people that have been adopted, even if they do know their actual birth date and they do know the details of their birth, even if they knew all the details, let's say, it's still really sensitive because on your birthday, I know on my birthdays, I reflect on my life, I reflect on who I am, I reflect on my place in the world. And if that's still something that you have so many uncertainties around or so much trauma and pain around, potentially, it's a whole other experience. So, yeah, so thank you for that quick crash course.
Yeah.
I guess since so many things came up, we should go back to the start of this story. So you were basically adopted by white American parents?
Yes.
And how old were you when you were adopted?
I was adopted when I was around 2, and then I was brought to the U.S. when I was 3.
Okay, so what happened between 2 and 3?
I was in an orphanage. So I was separated from my first mother when I was 11 months old.
Wow.
And I would live in an orphanage where other children who, through their own experiences, found themselves there. Different ages, infant through a little bit older.
And then when your parents decided to adopt you, is there a lot of paperwork or something? So they met you and then it took time until they were actually able to bring you to the States?
Yes, there's legal paperwork that needs to be done. I needed a passport. Some other documents were I needed to get a checkup from, doctors to determine my health. I had to get the process to become a citizen. And my father actually just told me the other day that, as soon as I had landed, I had become a citizen. So yeah, there's a lot of paperwork that goes into it. And not all adoptees have access to that. And I acknowledge the privilege it is to have some documents in my care.
Do you have any memories from your time in the orphanage?
I don't, I really wish I did. I really wish that I could remember what things look like. I have some photos that my family from the U.S. took while I was there. Over time, I've looked at them and I'm like, do I remember anything and I remember during the years of searching and as just the internet got better at having, access to things, I did find the orphanage online and tried to look at those updated photos or videos. And I'm like, no, nothing's recalled. But my plan is when I get a chance to go back, I would like to check out the orphanage and see if anything is remembered. The body remembers things, but I'm curious to see if anything is recalled. When I returned back in 2021, I didn't have a chance to go to it, but it is on my list of necessary visits when I go back for the second time.
I am curious to hear what that experience would be like for you. I mean, there's so many firsts when you're going through this process of investigating, probably. And it's interesting doing it as an adult, too. So tell me about your adoptive family.
Yes, so I was adopted by white Americans, and I am one of 6 children. 3 of them are biologically related to them, and three of us are adopted. The adopted children are not connected by blood. One is domestic, and two of us are intercountry transracial adoptions.
And the three biological kids, are they older or younger than the adoptees?
They're older. They were born first.
I've never met your adoptive parents, but they sound like saints to me.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess my response to that will be that's one of the big terms that's used when talking
Really?
about adoption. Yeah, kind of like saviors. Yeah, and so they are good people. You know, I had a pretty good childhood, but I do, when I tell the story, I kind of remove that narrative that there was like any saving done in the whole adoption process. You know, when we idolize people and say good, or you know, if we're referring to biological family as bad, or we're pretty much saying that one had more of a deserving chance at parenthood. You know, we say like they had all of what they needed to be able to raise me versus, you know, families that didn't have all of the resources. You know, we're not really, you know, we're not acknowledging the birth families in this and saying, you know, they're saints for, you know, whatever, you know, happens in that way. So that's kind of where the centering of comes in when we are talking about our stories, is the level of who is capable, right? Who is
Yes.
good, who is not good, or who should or who shouldn't parent.
That's really interesting, and I haven't looked at it in that way, that, yeah, like praising one person might encapsulate to a certain degree that the first parents, as you said, which was also a new thing I've heard, first parents, had failed. So then how would you suggest talking about adoptive parents?
That's a good question. I think we can talk to them, or we can talk about them as people. And the only reason why I'm using adoptive parents, and I've actually, the evolution of how I talk about each of my family members has changed quite a bit since being in, you know, reclaiming and community and stuff like that. I think if we don't put so much emphasis on the greatness of what an action, you know, that was taken, if we can kind of remove the centering of those people and center other voices, I think, and other narratives, I think it's better. For a while, especially when I was younger and I was sharing my story with people that I found that were adopted, or just learning how to like have conversations about it, I often led with the narrative of what my adoptive parents, my US parents, told me. And rarely did I ever lead with how I felt or with the acknowledgement of my first family, birth family. And so the narrative was, it was kind of like meant to be situation, all the stars aligned kind of situation where it led us to you. And there was so much love in the choice to adopt that it was just necessary. And also, my parents here in America, they didn't have a lot of information. So I know that impacted and played in how the story was told. It was from their narrative. And I was very young. So it's not like when it first happened, anybody, you know, was communicating with me and asked, you know, how I felt or what I thought about what this would look like in 30 years, 40 years. But I often led with, you know, you were placed in the orphanage. It was done out of love, and the nuns and your mother wanted, my first mother wanted like a better life for you. And then here you are, you know, with privilege and possibilities. Now, privilege wasn't used, you know, it wasn't like, now you have privilege, but I acknowledge that having been brought over here, there are privileges that are not over there. So I spent many years saying that orphanage. It was out of love. And, you know, when I became a mother, it completely shifted. And I began to understand that it wasn't out of love all the way. And it wasn't a choice. When we talk about choices, it's okay, here are your choices. What is going to best suit you? What choice is going to make things easier for you or better for you? Where you'll feel good, where you have time to process and really understand the choice that you're making, and not you are unable to take care of a child because of the system of racism, of colonialism, of all of that. And because of that, you have no resources to do it where you can do it in a positive way, in a healthy way, or whatever.
We're definitely going to talk about motherhood and all of that. Just before we go there, I wanted to ask you, what was your experience? There's young you, young Maria Fernanda, telling this story to everyone. Essentially, I was lucky, I was saved, it was pure love, it was meant to be. But inside, how were you feeling growing up?
Yeah, I did feel a lot of love growing up, and I did feel like I had love and care. But being adopted into a white family, it made me, kind of almost a target for people to ask invasive questions, or to say things that were you just don't say that to people.
Like, can you give us some examples if you're comfortable?
Yeah, of course. So, I was put in dance class and loved it and enjoyed it. And when I would ask to be dropped off, and my parents didn't know why I wanted to be dropped off until literally a few years ago, and we kind of like talked ourselves through that. But the reason why I wanted to just be dropped off and go inside and go to dance class was because there was a girl who would tell me that, it wasn't okay to that her mother had said that, people of that were different in color weren't allowed to mix. And I remember when she said that, two things happened. I knew that I was mixed, not like fully at that time because I was young. But then also I didn't match what my American parents look like. So it was almost like a double-edged sword. Not only didn't I look like, not only, was I mixed, so two people who didn't, weren't the same, had me, but then it was, here I am being raised by white people. And that led to me wanting to, in that situation, just drop me off. Let me go to dance. And the area so much wasn't predominantly white, but the extracurricular activities, the dance class didn't have a lot of people of color there. So, they were observing and made comments. And I just remember when other people did that, it began to have me question myself and my existence as well.
Ugh. What was your answer to that girl? If you even, or what would you do when she would say that to you?
At the time, I didn't say anything. I think I was just shocked. And now when I think about it, I'm like, wow, she had a lot of confidence in what she said. She felt just so right and so confident to tell somebody who she didn't like. We weren't close like that to even like have a conversation. But yeah, I reflect on it a lot. Like that was one of the big microaggressions that I still like remember. And
I don't know if that's micro.
yeah.
I think that
macro.
Full.
Yeah.
Full.
People walk with a lot of confidence when they think that they're right, when they don't understand things. We weren't having those conversations in my household. So I would
Really?
not have, yeah, I would not have known. I didn't have the tools. Now raising my kids, and we'll go into this, we've got tools. My kids have navigated their identity at a very young age, and nobody's gonna gaslight them. Nobody's gonna invalidate them, and nobody's going to try and tell them how they should be or what their identity is.
I just got chills. It's amazing that you're able to do that for your kids. And it's such a beautiful time right now where we are finding the words and finding ways to articulate. I'm curious, your other adopted siblings, were they persons of color as well?
One of them was same race as my parents,
Okay.
white, and then the other one is adopted intercountry, different race.
Okay. So did you feel like that potentially that sibling could understand you?
It just depends. I had mentioned before that every adoptee is different. And even if they are in shared households, they may experience things differently. They may internalize things. They may pick up things just differently and may have completely different experiences. The effects of adoption may even have a different influence on how they show up in the world and how they navigate their journeys. So we weren't having those conversations. So it wouldn't have been able to talk to anybody because we weren't having those conversations.
So there was just none of this conversation across the board, not with your parents, not with your siblings. It was like non-existent.
No, and I think that it wasn't done out of malice. I don't think it was we're not going to acknowledge that our kids are, not white. It was just, we're raising our kids. We're giving them
Yeah.
a loving home. So I can acknowledge that. But a person of color, I have to have those conversations with my kids. And if a person doesn't have the tools or, hasn't had the experiences either personally or, around them to understand what it's like to live as a person of color, as a non-white person, it's going to be very hard to then pass that information down. So if the conversation, if we didn't talk about race ever, which there was an occasion, and I can share that, where we did talk about race, then there weren't tools given or in place on how to navigate outside the house.
Yeah. I mean, we grew up similar as I think it was the times as well. It was just, you don't really talk about it. There's racism all around, but you're not talking about it too much. We didn't talk about these things or the implications of us being mixed growing up in our house. It was just like, yeah, it's there. It's that. We are aware that when we walk outside as a family, people stare at us, but we never sat down and were like, how do you feel about that? It was almost like there was maybe this silent agreement, like we all understand what this is, which to a degree, yes, but it's true that each person is having their individual experience. Like in my family, the boys came out looking kind of Caucasian, and then the girls came out Asian, different degrees of Asianness or different types of Asian looks. We sort of look like sisters, but yeah, we all had our individual experiences, and we didn't talk about it too much as well. So tell me about that story you said that you were going to share, the one time you did talk about race.
So it's when I began dating my husband, boyfriend, now husband. It might have even been before that, when maybe I was talking about him and they just said, we don't we support whoever you love. We don't have any restrictions. You do you love whoever you want to love. But whoever you fall in love with or are in partnership with, their families may have an issue with how all that looks. And it was good information. That conversation was helpful, but that was the limit of it. And I'll take it back that a person who is not of color, they're not going to experience what a person of color will. So they couldn't prepare me. But households where there is harm done to, the marginalized community, there are conversations that are happening in there. And it just didn't happen with me growing up. except for that little relationship advice. And, it was like, okay.
So how old were you when you started dating your husband, boyfriend?
19.
And how did his family react to him dating you?
Most everyone was fine. I'm not going to put on blast like the specific person, but it was somebody who was old school, and they had some reservations about it. Treated me very nicely, but there was like, hey, it's a little taboo to do it.
To you or to both of you, or?
It wasn't said to me. It was said to my husband at the time, boyfriend. And I never felt it. Like before knowing that, I wouldn't have known. And after knowing that, I wouldn't have known. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, this is so uncomfortable. It was, well, that's interesting.
Interesting. How did you feel when you found out?
It was weird because I'm just a person, and I do no harm. And I'd like somebody to get to know me and see how I am that way before having been judged. But I had the understanding of the generation thing. Like I am aware of it. They didn't pass the law of interracial marriage until I think it was like 1967.
So how long after dating your boyfriend did you get married? Did you have a baby? Did it happen in that order?
It definitely did not happen in that order. I became a young mama. I, was pregnant, and after I gave birth to her, I turned 21. So
basically, that means a year after you guys got together, you got pregnant.
Yeah.
What did you do? What was your mind saying to you?
That's a great question. And that's where the whole deconstructing started to happen with my story. Is I found myself pregnant. I wasn't married. I was raised in, you wait and all of that. And
you didn't wait.
I didn't wait. And it was quite an experience. But I found myself connecting with my first mother in that moment very strongly, having this empathy and understanding of having choice and her not having choice, right? I had choices and she did not. And I just remember it being a big kind of aha moment. In the adoptee community, one of the phrases that we use from time to time, and everybody uses it differently, and some people like it and some people don't, but it's called coming out of the fog. And it's where you kind of have that moment or that experience where you're like, wait a second, the rose-colored glasses have been lifted and I've got some question. It's kind of where the critical thinking starts happening. And you're just like, whoa. And that's one of the big moments where it happened for me. And I was just like, whoa, I'm going to be a young mom. I have the resources and the partner who's ready to do this hard thing. And my first mother did not. And it was quite emotional.
I can only imagine. I mean, how could you even contain all of these thoughts? Like it was like a volcano erupted. And you're hormonal because you're pregnant and you're young and you're at that age where you're going out into the world for the first time as an adult, like you're figuring things out. Like it's always like an age where there's these nerves of like, what is my life going to look like? Who am I going to be? What am I going to do? That's stressful enough as it is, let alone, oh my gosh, I'm going to be a mother by surprise.
Mm-hmm.
And it's taboo. And it's even to some people taboo that I'm in this relationship. Mm-hmm. And my whole life is about to change. And my entire identity has just been completely thrown up, like, into question. Mm-hmm. And like you said, you're feeling this dialogue starting with your first mother that is beautiful in a way. And also intense and maybe scary and maybe like what it's like this door opened.
Yeah, it was like, I remember just taking the test in my bathroom, and I had bought the test by myself, and took it by myself, and it's like 3 minutes that you have to wait, and it's the longest 3 minutes of my life. And I'm just sitting in the bathroom, and I'm like, I know that my body felt different, but I was like, you got to take the test. And so I took the test, and I just remember it literally just sitting there going, and I don't know those details, but like, she had that moment too. Here I am with child. And out of my siblings, I'm the second one, second oldest of my first mother. But here I was going, the feelings that I'm having are ones that she had: scared, judged, guilt, uncertainty, all of these emotions. And it really, yeah, it was a big moment of connecting to this woman that I hadn't seen, since I was 11 months old.
Whew. So at that point, what did you know about your first mother or your birth family?
At that point, really nothing. I knew that, or I was told that my first mother was a domestic worker, that she, worked for someone. I didn't know that I had any siblings. I knew that I was of mixed race, Ecuadorian and Black, but I didn't know which parent was what. And that's pretty much it. I wouldn't learn her name until 2014, until I was 30.
Wow. Okay, so the ride begins. You're like, make sure your seatbelt's on because we are taking off.
Yes. Yeah.
So what did you start doing?
I was pregnant with my first, and I didn't have any medical history. And here I was going to the doctors and doing this big thing, right? I didn't know if anything was serious. Like, I just didn't know. But I went to the doctor's appointment and checkup and everything. And so that's part of what led me to want to know, was that I don't have any history. I don't have anything to even share with my daughter. And then it was, I don't even know how to tell her about anything because I know nothing. And it was like, I'm going to look into this. I'm going to figure out what I want to do. The only medical history that I have from when I was in Ecuador was when the adoption process started. And I've got like measurements and stuff. I don't know how big I was. So I didn't know how big my babies were going to be. And they were big. They were 9-pound babies, 9+ pound babies. But I just didn't know as I was going to get older. I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. But we don't come with those records, whether, things are done in secrecy. They want to kind of erase the history. I know that I was told that the nuns, like, their goal was to get these children into families that they thought were better equipped and they could have a better life. They were not trying to keep records, like erase and start new life, new you type of, scenario. And so I didn't come with any medical history. I didn't know if I didn't know that I had any siblings, but I didn't know even the medical history of my mother or my birth or any of that. So you're just kind of walking and you're just like, well, I don't know what's going to happen as I get older. I don't know if, it's a weird space to be in. It's like a weird void that you're just kind of like,
Yeah, it's another layer of uncertainty and another maybe sense of like, I'm not being like protected, or
yeah.
there is like this sense of I can control a little bit more my destiny if I know this information.
Yeah, there's no preventative. We can't prevent anything if we don't know, right? And if we have children and then it continues, that continue, in the history that, well, I can't tell you, but here you are. And, you might have inherited something from my side and we have no clue. My kids know on the paternal side, on either side of the paternals, on even their grandparents and all of that. But on mine, it's like, we're going to figure it out together. We don't know. We're going to see what happens.
I know when I go to the doctor and they give you that starter package form to fill out, I dread it, right? We all dread it. And how did it feel like for you when you were sitting there at the OBGYN and they give you these 10 forms to fill out? How do you feel in those moments?
You feel erased. You feel, growing up, my mother here in America, and I've talked about it where, when she was filling out the forms, she had to put, adopted. So when I was younger, the conversations were geared towards her, right? And then as I got older, it was, well, it's my body. I can now advocate and vocalize for myself. So I would put not applicable, or I would put adopted, and really never got any empathy from filling that out. But the same thing with carrying my child and having to fill out those documents.
Why don't they have a square that says the option of adopted? Would that help, right?
It would help.
Just to be acknowledged.
Yes. And it would help, so that we don't have to be like, okay, we're going to fill this out because nobody knows that we exist. But I think what also needs to happen is the people in the medical field, they need to be informed and not just have it where it's a box that they check off, but if they read it, and they should read it, and then, remember what they read, and don't come back in the room and say, all right, so tell me, do you have a history of this?
Oh my God.
Yeah, I just filled it out for you. And, so there's just that being informed, medical doctors that are dealing with our mental health, our emotional health, our physical health, they should be informed of those things so that we can be taken care of.
Yeah, that makes me so frustrated. There's so many things that are broken and wrong, but I'm glad we're having this conversation. And these types of conversations, they give me hope,
Yeah.
And I'm already, there's still so much to go that I want to learn about you, but I already feel like I've learned so much. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
There is so much more to Maria Fernanda's story, and next week we're just going to dive head in first into her incredible story of reunion with her birth family and all the lengths she went to find them during, nonetheless, a global pandemic. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow, share, subscribe. Also, leave a review. That would be amazing. I'd love to hear from you. If you have any thoughts or stories that you want to share around this topic, you can email me at mixunderstoodpod@gmail.com or call in at 323-524-8662 and leave a voice message. I would love that. And we could play it here on the podcast and share it with everyone. Also, if you want to support this podcast, we have a Patreon. The link is in the show notes. Alrighty, on that note, I'm going to say bye for now and see you next week with part 2 of Maria Fernanda's journey. This episode was produced by me, music by Matthias Kunzli.